Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu wa salam ala Rasulullahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Inshallah, in today's session, we will continue the topic that we started last week, which was about just an overview, brief overview about some of the schools of thoughts. Last week, we talked about the beginning part of the beginning information that we need to understand the schools of thoughts, inshallah, and why we're talking about those schools of thoughts. So we talked about the era of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then we talked about the era of the Sahaba. Today we'll start with era of Tabi'een. Tabi'een means the next generation who saw the Sahaba in the state of Islam. So they did not meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rather, they were the following generation after the Sahaba who interacted with the Sahaba, who studied under the Sahaba as well. And inshallah, in today's discussion, we'll talk about the era of Tabi'een a little bit, and then we'll talk about the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa. So we will not go into the details of madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa. Rather, we'll talk about Imam Abu Hanifa and the situations around him and the students in the books written by him or his students, inshallah. So when it comes to the era of Tabi'een, when Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an, when he became the Khalifa, he kept all the Sahaba in Medina. He used to allow some of the Sahaba on need basis to go away from Medina, but with this understanding that they will return back to Medina after the period of time is expired. And then in the time of Uthman bin Affan radiallahu an, when he became the Khalifa, he allowed the Sahaba to go and disperse, and this is why we find many of the Sahabas even graves in many different parts of the world which are far away from Medina. That includes Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu an, who went to Kufa, and Abdurrahman bin Auf, he reached even up to he reached China, and his grave is even in China, and he reached up to Beijing nowadays, or Peking from the older names. And Abdullah bin Umar stayed in Medina though, and there were some Sahaba who even moved back to Mecca as well. But for most of the two main groups of Sahaba were either in Kufa or Medina. Hence, we find some of the schools of thoughts, they actually started off from those areas where Sahaba in general stayed. And as I said, the Kufa and Medina became the centers of the Sahaba in general. And those who so we should understand when we say Tabi'een, so those whom we call Tabi'een, they were the followers of the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or to a specific Sahabi. For example, Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab, Nafi' and Salim bin Abdullah bin Umar are well-known Tabi'een. Tabi'een means the generation after the Sahaba, who followed Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhuma. And most of the Tabi'een were not actually Arabs, because Islam was expanding, and they were not Arabs, but they learned the Arabic language, and in some cases actually they learned the language better than the Arabs. And like for example, Sibawayh was Persian, and he actually put together even the books of Nahu wa Sarf, meaning the grammars and the conjugation of the Arabic words. And similarly, we even today, when we hear these names like Imam Bukhari, which means that he was from Bukhara, or his at least ancestors were from Bukhara, or Imam Muslim, he was from Nishapur, or Imam Tirmidhi from Tirmidh. All these areas were part of Central Asia, and they were not Arabs actually. So in Islam, we don't actually look at these things from the perspective of Arab or Ajam, because we understand that being an Arab it does not mean you are better than the Ajam. Or Ajam means the non-Arab, by the way. The word Ajam is used for it's a term used for non-Arabs. So Arabs are not better than the non-Arabs, and non-Arabs are not better than the Arabs. Or black is not better than white, or white is not better than black, or brown, or whatsoever. in the sight of Allah Azza wa Jal, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. In front of Allah, the more honorable one is the one who has taqwa of Allah Azza wa Jal, who has a God consciousness, the one who is aware of Allah Azza wa Jal, the one who watch out the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so that's about the era of the about the tabi'in, the definition of tabi'in, and now out of those tabi'in,
I think we lost Asim. Just bear with us. We should be back online.
I think I was disconnected. Can you hear me now?
Yes, alhamdulillah.
Okay, I think my Wi-Fi was bad. Okay, so let me share. I think I have to share again as well. Okay, you can see me, all right?
We're good.
Okay, so the two main schools of thoughts that came out were, one is called Ahlul Hadith, the people of the Hadith in Medina, and the other one in general were the followers of Ahlul Ra'i, or the people of reason or the opinions, and they were mostly from Kufa. And there are some misconceptions. I want to make sure that we clarify those misconceptions as well when we talk about this era of Tabi'in, and when we talk about these schools of thoughts, the Ahlul Hadith and Ahlul Ra'i. So those who followed Ahlul Hadith, the people of Hadith had more Hadith at their disposal. Don't forget that. These are the people who stayed in Medina. Medina was the center of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was ruling from there. Even the, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, they continued to rule from Medina. Medina was the headquarters for the Islam. And and as I mentioned before, that until the time of Umar, he kept the Sahaba in Medina, while in the time of Uthman, he allowed them to disperse. But still, they dispersed mostly to these two regions, Medina and Kufa. Now, but Medina continued to be the main center of the Sahaba. So hence, they had more access to the hadith at the disposal and relied on hadith more than on the qiyas. So we talked about qiyas previously. Qiyas is when you don't have a direct ruling, but you can make an analogy on another existing hukum, which is based off the Quran and Sunnah. Okay, so the ayat that can have another parallel hukum can be extracted. So again, the source is the Quran and Sunnah. Again, it's not the mind of the person that's coming up with a new opinion. Okay, you can still hear me, right, brother?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's and Ahlul Ra'i. The people of Ra'i relied more on qiyas, okay, and meanings behind the text. See, this is a key thing to understand. When they are doing the qiyas is on the text. It's not just based on the mind, but did not at all neglect the hadith, and they were not the one who were neglecting the hadith. Sometimes people think of it as if Ahlul Hadith are the one who follow the hadith, and Ahlul Ra'i are the one they follow their opinions and they come up with their opinions from their mind. That's not the case. So we have to be very clear on that part. Again, I'm repeating that aspect of it, that even the one who are Ahlul Ra'i, they are also following the text from the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay. Another difference between the two schools is that the Ra'i reasoning in the school of Ra'i was based on qiyas, while in Medina, Ra'i was based on an elaboration of the text. Okay, Medina. So Medina also had people who were from the Ahlul Ra'i as well. So don't forget that. So it's again from the text that we're talking about. They were extracting the rules from. Okay. Now moving on to some of the tabi'in. The famous tabi'in that existed in Medina were Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab, Zuhri, Yahya, and Rubi' al-Rai, Urwa, Abu Bakr bin Ubaid, Qasim bin Muhammad, Ubaidullah, Sulaiman bin Yasir, and Khayja bin Zayd. Okay, they took their fiqh from Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anh, and Sa'id ibn Musayyab was known as al-Jari, the outspoken, or the one who has guts to make ijtihad, while Rabi' was called a Ra'i because of his common practicing of making ijtihad. So this is just a side titles about these tabi'in and some of the famous tabi'in from there. Does not mean that's the only ones. Now, when we say Ahlul Ra'i, what does that mean? The word Ra'i linguistically means opinion. Therefore, some people think that term Ahlul Ra'i, the people Ra'i, means the people who present their opinion. This is a misconception to anyone who believes that their opinions were based on their desires. And we'll talk about that as well, because Allah Azza wa Jal, through Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we find that it has been condemned in Islam to just come up with your opinions based on the mind. Yes, we use the mind to understand the text of the Quran and the Sunnah and to conclude what Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala wants from us. But that does not mean that mind becomes solely the source of it, meaning mind says that's beneficial, so go for it, or that's harmful, so don't do it. No, it goes back to the text of the Quran and Sunnah from where we extract the rulings. Okay, now opinions presented by Ahlul Ra'i was through the ijtihad. And as we have discussed the concept of ijtihad is an effort you fully exert to understand, to collect all the information from the sources of Islam, and then come up with an understanding of the reality first, and then apply whatever you have extracted from the Quran Sunnah and understand what is the ruling in it for that specific reality and apply on it. So this whole process of exerting all the efforts to understand the text and to collect the text and to understand the reality and to know what is the ruling on the specific reality is the ijtihad. So the ijtihad automatically is actually based off the Quran and the Sunnah, the legislative sources of Islam, not the mind. Mind is just to use to understand these things. Okay. Now, so why the Ahlul Ra'i more came up in Kufa, for example? The question comes up in the mind, and a little bit I hinted when I said that in the Medina, the Sahaba stayed more in Medina, hence they had more access to the ahadith compared to the ones who were in Kufa. The people in Kufa, plus they had some other issues were rising up over there. They were experiencing many problems, such as the fabrication of the hadith. If we go back to our discussion on the topic of the hadith, when we were discussing about the categories of the hadith and the hadiths which were fabricated as well, which are called, which is the hadith of one of the types of the da'if hadith, which is called mawdu'. And mawdu' is something which is fabricated and it is rejected. And the only purpose of categorization of the hadith is to understand that which of the hadith we cannot take, which of them we can take. And inshallah, if somebody wants to at least get the basic terminologies, can go back to the lectures and listen to them as well. And I think the brothers have already done a good job to put the numbers, talk numbers, and the titles that can give you an idea which talk is talking about which subject. Okay, now, so hadith fabrication was one issue that came up. Political turmoil was going on, and scholars were very careful in collecting the hadith due to the possibility of fabrication of the hadith. Due to these problems, they often use reasonings as well. So besides the access to that as much as the others, also because of the issue of the fabrication that was rising up. Okay, now the reasoning here implies opinion derived from different understandings of the text. Thus they came to be known as the Ahlul Ra'i. So that's why they were called Ahlul Ra'i. It's not because they put the Quran Sunnah on the side and they're coming up with their opinions from their own mind. No, they were still going back to the sources, going back to the legislative sources, which are the Quran and Sunnah, and extracting the rules from there. Okay, now some of the Ahlul Ra'i which were famous are like, for example, Al-Sha'bi, Hassan al-Basri, Ibrahim al-Nakhai, Hamad, Al-Qama bin Qais, Masjid bin Ajda', and etc. So these were the this was actually Masruq, not Masjid. There's a typo here. Masruq bin Ajda'. And these tabi'in took their fiqh in general from Ali bin Abi Talib and Abdullah bin Mas'ud. to the greater Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of the Tabi'in, such as Shar'i, was considered a muhaddith as well. So it's not that they were not, they did not have a hadith or something at all. No, there are other issues involved as well. Shar'i himself was referred, is taken as a muhaddith. Muhaddith is a scholar of the hadith, and he was in Kufa. Okay, now I want to make sure that we have a clarity about this point of opinions based on mind in Islam. Okay, there's a hadith also there, inshallah, there are 3 different hadith, just to make this point with clarity. Hadith of Rasulullah, which is reported by both Bukhari and Muslim, and we've talked about that as well. A hadith which is reported by both Imam Muslim and Imam Bukhari in their Sahihain are considered as muttafaq alayh, meaning this hadith is agreed upon by both the big scholars of the hadith, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Bukhari, and Imam Muslim, rahimahullah alayhima. So now they reported this hadith that Allah does not take away the knowledge. Inna Allah la yaqbidu al-ilma intiza'an yantazi'uhu min al-ibad, walakin yaqbidu al-ilma biqabdi al-ulama. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not take just the ilm away. The knowledge will not be just lifted. Knowledge will not just disappear. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away the ulama, meaning they will die, and the ilm continues to be here, but the people who understand that knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take them away. Now, the hadith goes on until حتى إذا لم يبقى عالما اتخذ الناس رؤوسا جهالا, that until there will be no more ulama, and people will take their leaders, the ignorant people, as their leaders. And فسئلوا فافتوا بغير علم فضلوا وأضلوا. The hadith says, and then people will take the ignorant people as their leaders, and they will be asked, and they will give the fatwas without the knowledge, without the ilm, and they will be misguided, and they will misguide the others as well. Okay, so it's not the issue of the ilm will disappear. Ilm will continue to be there, but people will be going to the or make their ignorant people as their leaders, and they are the one who will be giving the fatwas, and they will be misguiding and be misguided as well. Similarly, the other hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says, my ummah will become divided into 70 sects or 70 some sects. The greatest will be the test to the people who make analogy to the deen with their own opinions, with it forbidding what Allah has permitted and permitting what Allah has forbidden. Okay, now this hadith actually, even though it's not collected by Bukhari and Muslim, but they are collected on the shurut or the conditions that both Imam Muslim and Imam Bukhari have set for collecting the hadith. Now, so hadith says that and both the hadith, the previous one and this one also, just talking about Muslims who divide into 70 sects, is talking about that these sects are basically, there will be people who will be misguiding the others also and themselves by making the opinions from their own mind, from their own opinions. That is a problem. So that it says, this is talking about يَقِيسُونَ الْأُمُورِ بِرَأِيهِمْ. يَقِيسُونَ بِالْأُمُورِ, they will be doing the qiyas of about the actions with their opinion, with their own mind, and they will be making haram as halal and halal as haram. Of course, this is all condemned. So using the mind as the basis of coming up with the ruling has been condemned in many places in the Quran and the Sunnah. Similarly, the hadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions, that this hadith is reported by Tirmidhi, it says that beware of narrating from me except what I taught you. For whoever lies about me on purpose, then let him take his seat in the fire. So this is about the saying a lie about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam condemned that, and he said, whoever knowingly says something that he did not say, then for sure he will have the seat in the hellfire. And we talked about this hadith also previously when we were discussing the concept of hadith mutawatir and hadith ahad. And this is one of the mutawatir ahadith actually that talks about that anyone فَمَنْ كَذَبَ عَلَيَّ مُتَعَمِّدًا فَيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. Rasulullah said, anyone who says a lie on the behalf of Rasulullah knowingly, then for sure he has a seat in the hellfire. Okay, that's about that part. The other part says, And وَمَنْ قَالَ فِي الْقُرْآنِ بِرَأْيِهِ فَيَتَبَوَّأَ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. And whoever says about the Quran according to his own opinion, coming up with his opinions, just reading the Quran and without understanding or without having the proper knowledge of the Quran, and coming up with the opinions, extracting rules from his own mind, then for him also, the Source said, he will have the seat in the hellfire. Okay. Now, what is the conclusion out of it? When we talked about these hadith that we mentioned, the idea is, even the Ahlul Rai, they were not the one who were coming. Yes, they were coming up with the opinions. They were going into the depth of the text to understand the more meanings in the text. But that does not mean that they were making the opinions from their mind. Rather, they're getting the opinions they're doing the ijtihad based on the Quran and Sunnah, and coming up with the rulings from the Quran and Sunnah. Okay. Now, so just briefly, the misconceptions about the Ahlul Rai. Some people say the Ahlul Rai did not utilize hadith in issuing their opinion. This claim is false. People like Ash-Sha'bi was recognized as a muhaddith, as we talked about that, while being in Kufa, and he was Ahlul Rai. And the main difference between them was the people of Rai practiced more qiyas. Again, we talked about what the qiyas mean, and istihsan. And they went deeper into the text to extract more rulings than the people of hadith. These two main schools influenced many other schools of thoughts as well. So, as I said, then we will see the other schools of thoughts came out of these two main big schools. Okay, now Imam Abu Hanifa. So we'll talk about madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa now a little bit, inshallah. And today, hopefully, we should be able to cover that. As far as Abu Hanifa goes, he's one of the most famous ai*imma that we all are aware of. Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, his name was Abu Hanifa Nu'man bin Thabit bin Zawta bin Marzuban, and he was born in 80 after Hijrah, and he passed away in 150 after Hijrah, which is 700 to 768 Common Era. He was born to a well-known Persian family in Kufa. So from that perspective, so lineage-wise, he was also he was a non-Arab, and spent most of his life there. But in Islam, somebody learns the Arabic, because Arabic is not being an Arab is not a race. Anybody who knows the language is considered as Arab. But from the lineage perspective, his family was non-Arab. His father was a good friend of Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. Some of them say he was a good friend. Others talk about it. He met Ali bin Abi Talib in either way. So his father, at least, he met the Sahaba. And Abu Hanifa was a trader by profession, specializing in silk. Imam Abu Hanifa earned the title of Imam Mu'adh, the great Imam. Imam Shafi'i used to say that people in fiqh and are dependent upon Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. Okay, so Imam Shafi'i really was impressed by the understandings of Abu Hanifa as well, even though Imam Shafi'i had his own school of thought, his own madhab of his own. He was a mujtahid matlaq of his own. Okay, now when Imam Abu Hanifa was born, the surroundings need to be understood well as well. He was born in a situation, if we want to talk about the political situation, he was born during the Khilafah of Abdul Malik bin Marwan. And Abu Hanifa, he lived through 52 years of Umayyad rule and witnessed the Khilafah of 10 Umayyad Khulafa, including the of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, who ruled when he was, Abu Hanifa himself was 18 years of age. And he also saw 18 years of Abbasiya rule, including that of Safah and Mansur. So two of the Khulafa of the Abbasiya as well. And he realized that Umayyads had no claim on the Khilafah, but he did not rebel. He did not rebel against them because they were given the bay'ah, and he followed them because of the bay'ah made them the Khulafa. Similarly, when it was not the issue of he was along with the Abbasiya or Umayyad. Sometime when we read about Imam Abu Hanifa, some people try to show as if he was just against Banu Umayyah. That's not the case. It's the issue of he had ideological or the issues with the way they were ruling and stuff. And what we see is when the Abbasiyah, when they start ruling, even in their case, he did not speak in the beginning. When later on in the later part of his life, we see that he started talking about that when they started harassing the descendants of Ali radiallahu anhu. Okay. When it comes to his teachers, so that was about the political situation in his time where he was born, and now during the teachers. To understand the teachers, first we have to understand the whole lineage, and this is one of the things that you find about A'immah and the Muhaddithin, and even many of the schools of thoughts today who are teaching their students as well. They give the whole silsila. Silsila means connections of who you learned with, and your teacher who he learned with, and on and on and on. It goes back all the way to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whether it is a learning of the hadith, whether it's learning of the Quran, even the memorization of the Quran. So it takes they normally keep the whole chain of the people who they have learned with. So now here in this case, as I mentioned, the two schools of thoughts were created. One was in Medina based, one was in Kufa based. The one in the Kufa based was mainly established under Ali bin Abi Talib and Abdullah bin Mas'ud. Okay. Now they taught the Tabi'in that included people like Shuraih bin Harith. Shuraih bin Harith, he was a very famous qadi, very famous judge. And most of us probably have heard the story of a judge that Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anh, when he went to a market and he saw a Jew, he was holding his what is it called, his shield, and so that belonged to Ali, and he had it, so he stole it. Now Ali, he took him to the Qadi. That's why we hear that most of the time we hear this way, that he took the Jew person to the Qadi to get the judgment. That Qadi was actually Shuraih bin al-Harith. And Shuraih is the Qadi, he's actually referred normally as Qadi Shuraih. So Qadi Shuraih, he made the judgment in favor of the Jew, because Ali was not able to produce the witnesses to accommodate his case against the Jew. And we know that the Jew person, when he saw the justice of Islam, even though the Khalifa of that time, he had to be presented in front of the judge to make his case and produce his witnesses. And if he did not have the witnesses, the case went against him. So he became a Muslim, and Ali radiallahu anh gave him as a gift the shield that belonged to him, because he said that it was not his, and he was very impressed by the justice of Islam. But that Qadi was Qadi Shuraih. Now, other ones who learned under them was Arqam bin Qais, Masruq bin al-Ajda, and they in turn taught after that. So they taught the next generations of the scholars that included Ibrahim al-Nakha'i al-Sha'bi. And these two taught Hammad, rahimahullah, and who served as the teacher of Imam Abu Hanifa. So you can see that the lineage of Abu Hanifa goes from Abu Hanifa to Hammad to Ash-Sha'bi and Nakha'i, and from them to Qadi Shuraih and Masruq and Arqam, and that goes back to Ali bin Abi Talib and Abdullah bin Mas'ud. And Abu Hanifa, he studied under Hammad for about 18 years and took over his study circles, the halaqat that Hammad used to give after he passed away. Abu Hanifa is the one, he took over that halaqat. And after then Abu Hanifa also studied from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. Imam Ja'far, who was considered as one of the A'immahs of the Shia school of thought. But look, they did not look at these things the way, unfortunately, today many of us think of this, Imam Ja'far, Imam Zayd. And we find that Imam Hanifa is one of those, he studied partially at least under Imam Ja'far as well. And there's a book written by Abu Zahra from Egypt about the life of Imam Hanifa, and he discusses that subject in there. And he mentioned that he also studied under Imam Ja'far and Imam Baqir. And he mentions that that was not an issue actually to study under them. Now, obviously, after that, a lot of changes were made by people who call themselves that they are probably following the school of Imam Ja'far, Imam Baqir, but that very much same, was at least to a certain extent, can be seen about even many of us who are calling themselves that they are following Hanafi school of thought, and they may not be following Abu Hanifa's saying, or even the Hanafi school of thought. So we have to be careful about that. Yes, if something is wrong, it's wrong. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying just blindly follow anyone. Okay, so now, Imam Abu Hanifa, in the beginning of his early life, he also studied Ilm al-Kalam. Ilm al-Kalam is the knowledge that deals with the issues of the Aqidah. But he abandoned it afterwards. Once he heard his son, his name was Hamad, debating in Ilm al-Kalam. And when he saw him debating in Ilm al-Kalam, he discouraged him from doing so. So his son said, "You used to do that. Why are you prohibiting me to do that?" Now, Abu Hanifa's reply to him, he said that he used to debate in Ilm al-Kalam while being afraid that others would be wrong in an issue. See, because that's the issue of a person can enter into he can be out of Islam if he is saying wrong things when it comes to the Aqidah. Whereas you are debating with the hope that your opponent would be wrong. See, that there's a problem here. One is hoping the other would be wrong, meaning he will make mistake and he will be out of Islam. So he who wants his opponent to make a mistake in Ilm al-Kalam means that he wants him to be a kafir. And that's problematic. And he who wants his opponent to be a kafir will become a kafir before his opponent. So that's why he said, do not debate in Ilm al-Kalam. Of course, if for different other reasons can be done, but that should not be the mentality, and this is the mentality he stopped his son from. Okay, when it comes to the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, of course, the two most famous, I'm not sure if you want to call them as only the students, they were more of referred as Sahibain, his companions also, but they were considered students as well, of course, were Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah. Now, Imam Abu Hanifa, he wrote many books, and books on Islam. And some of the famous books are Fiqh al-Akbar and Al-Alim wal-Muallim. Now, a lot of work of Abu Hanifa is actually written by his students. So Abu Hanifa used to give halaqat to many people out there, and they learned and they wrote it down, and they wrote the books also, and referring to Imam Abu Hanifa's opinions in there. And some of the famous books that of those who follow his madhab include, so these are some of the other books. That doesn't mean that these are the only ones. This is just few of the books which are mentioned here, just for our understanding, so we have an idea. So like, for example, Al-Kharaj. Al-Kharaj was written by Qadi Abu Yusuf. I just want to make a quick point here, even though that's not relevant to that lecture right away, but it is important for us to remember that though. Look, the companions of Imam Abu Hanifa, Qadi Abu Yusuf, he wrote a book on Al-Kharaj. Why would a person write a book on Al-Kharaj? Because that was the need of it. That was actually, the state existed that was implementing Islam, and Kharaj was one of the main sources from which the money used to come for the state to be run. So he wrote a book on Al-Kharaj. And but today, even when we try to read these books, they seem irrelevant for us, because we have not seen Islam being practiced as a system of life. So we look at those books and we get tired of reading the economic system, because we become so much used to this capitalistic Islamic system, or sorry, capitalistic system, not capitalist Islam system. There is no such thing called capitalistic Islam system. The capitalistic system or capitalistic economic system that we think as if that's the only system that exists. No, that's not the case. As a matter of fact, that is creating so much corruption for the mankind, and Islam is the only system that can save the mankind from that corrupted system that is making rich more richer and making poor as poorer and poorer, and to the point that they cannot even survive. as I have mentioned in many other talks like this, about 25,000 people die on a daily basis out of hunger. So that's because of the corrupted economic system that exists in the world that makes people die out of hunger. On top of it, there are people who are dying because of overeating, and they're destroying the food to keep the pricing up. That's a subject that some other time, inshallah, we'll discuss. Similarly, but the point here is, you find those books were written because that's the reality they were in, and there are Muslims have a history of 1300 years and books written over on many topics of whether it's about economic system, whether it's about judicial system, ruling system, economic education policies, foreign policies, and on and on and on, that makes the life go on according to Islam. So Islam gave the answers of all the problems all the time. Okay, so that's the Al-Kharaj book was written for that, from that point of view. Al-Mabsut by Sarkhasi, this is the book on the fiqh, and Badi' al-Sana'i by al-Kaskasani, and Fatah al-Qadid by Ibn Hammam, and Kitab al-Usul al-Fiqh by Bazdawi, and Kitab al-Athar by Yusuf bin Abu Yusuf. And this is about the hadith. And we will find many books which are written in the Abu Hanifa's or Hanafi school of thought by the later scholars, and until today, the ones who are following the usul of Imam Abu Hanifa, the books that they come up with, they are considered as the Hanafi books. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover for today. And inshallah, if there is any questions or comments on the subject,